Tonight, we begin with a moment so extraordinary that even veteran intelligence analysts reportedly paused before believing what they were seeing. At San 48 Moscow time, Ukrainian forces launched a coordinated strike deep inside Russia, not against a military base or command bunker, but against something Vladimir Putin himself believed was untouchable, his personal residence outside Moscow. Novo Ogorovo is not just a house. It is the physical symbol of Putin's power. Protected by layered air defenses, S-400 missile systems, electronic warfare units, and elite security rings, it was designed to be unreachable. And yet, in the early hours of the morning, Ukrainian drones, possibly supported by modified British Storm Shadow missiles, pierced every layer of protection and struck the estate. Planned for nearly 3 years, Putin has sent missiles into Ukrainian cities, hospitals, apartment blocks, and power grids. He tried to freeze Ukraine into submission, terrorize civilians, and erase a nation's will to fight. But tonight, the war came home, not to ordinary Russians, but to the man who started it. This was not just an attack. It was a psychological rupture. Because when a smaller nation reaches through hundreds of miles of defended airspace and touches the untouchable, something fundamental changes. Deterrence shifts, invincibility collapses, and the myths that authoritarian power depends on begin to crack. To understand why this moment matters, we have to look at how we got here. In March, Russian tanks rolled toward Kyiv. Western intelligence predicted Ukraine would fall within days. Plans were drawn up to evacuate President Zelensky and establish a government in exile. The assumption was simple. Russia's size, weapons, and manpower would crush resistance. That assumption failed. Ukraine didn't just survive, it adapted. Russian forces were pushed back from Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Kherson. But even as Ukraine defied expectations, an unspoken rule governed the war. Ukraine could defend itself, but not strike deep into Russia. Western allies feared escalation. Ukraine was expected to fight with restraint, while Russia fought without limits. Think about that imbalance. Russian launch sites fired daily into Ukrainian cities, but Ukraine was warned not to hit the source. Civilians died, but retaliation was too dangerous. This logic defined 2 years of policy. Help Ukraine survive, but not win. And yet, Russia ignored every rule. It used Iranian drones, North Korean ammunition, and deliberate civilian targeting. Ukraine followed restrictions longer than any nation reasonably should have. Then, slowly, something changed. Ambient by late, Arsène Arsercith. Western leaders recognized a reality they could no longer avoid. Limiting Ukraine's ability to strike was not preventing escalation. It was enabling defeat. The US authorized limited ATACMS strikes. Britain removed usage restrictions on Storm Shadow missiles. France followed. Germany softened its stance. This wasn't generosity. It was survival logic, which brings us back to Sen 48 According to multiple intelligence sources, Ukrainian drones approached Moscow through carefully mapped radar gaps, flying low and coordinated from multiple directions. Russian air defenses failed to acquire them. Electronic jammers failed. Final layer systems were overwhelmed. At least one drone struck the main residence building. Satellite imagery shows visible structural and fire damage. This isn't speculation. Independent analysts confirmed it. Ukraine didn't claim a symbolic hit. They proved it. And here's the crucial point. This was never about killing Putin. Ukrainian intelligence almost certainly knew he wouldn't be there. Russian leaders move unpredictably for this exact reason. This strike was a message. It said, we know where you live, we know where you hide, and your defenses cannot stop us. For a leader whose authority rests entirely on strength, that message is devastating. Putin has spent decades acting without personal consequence, Crimea, election interference, assassinations, invasion. Each time he faced sanctions and speeches, but no real risk. That sense of immunity made him dangerous. Tonight, that immunity cracked. Russia's response was immediate and revealing. State media screamed about total annihilation. Officials issued familiar threats. But listen closely. Panic hides behind the rhetoric. These are not words of confidence. They are the language of a regime that lost control of its story. And stories matter in authoritarian systems. Putin's authority has always rested on one core belief, that he is strong, protected, and ultimately beyond reach. His power depends as much on perception as it does on force. When that perception weakens, even slightly, the consequences ripple far beyond any single event. If locations tied to Russia's leadership can be approached or threatened, it forces uncomfortable questions. If Ukraine is portrayed as collapsing, how does it continue to demonstrate coordination, reach, and technical capability deep inside contested territory? Yet, inside Russia, official narratives remain tightly controlled. State media offers certainty, confidence, and reassurance, but doubt does not spread loudly. It spreads quietly, through questions people ask themselves when events no longer align with the story they are being told. From a strategic standpoint, this moment carries even deeper implications. For decades, nuclear-armed states operated under the assumption that their status created an untouchable zone, a form of sanctuary that limited how far conflicts could go. Over time, Ukraine has tested those assumptions carefully, incrementally, without crossing thresholds that would trigger catastrophic escalation. Each step produced dire warnings. Each step produced threats, but none produced the outcome those threats implied. That reality matters because it reveals something uncomfortable. Escalation rhetoric is most powerful when it is believed. When repeated without consequence, it loses its ability to intimidate. Mean that at its core, this war has never truly been about abstract geopolitics or alliance structures. It has been about a democratic society resisting an attempt to erase its sovereignty, its language, and its future. Ukrainians are not fighting theories. They are defending homes, families, and identity. And resilience, more than any single weapon system, has become their defining strength. Ukraine was expected to fall quickly. Then it was expected to fracture under pressure, then to freeze, exhaust itself, or fade into stalemate. And instead, nearly 3 years later, it continues to adapt. International reactions reflect that shift. Washington acknowledged recent developments without condemnation. London emphasized Ukraine's restraint. Paris and Berlin reaffirmed the principle of self-defense. And notably, countries that often align with Moscow chose silence. In geopolitics, silence is rarely accidental. It signals calculation, and sometimes recognition. This moment does not end the war. It does not force immediate negotiations, but it alters psychology, and psychology shapes long conflicts. Threats lose impact when they become routine. Promises lose credibility when outcomes never follow. Russia predicted a swift victory. Ukraine remains. Russia predicted collapse. Ukraine endured. Russia predicted decisive outcomes. Reality intervened. The war has imposed heavy costs on Russia without delivering its stated goals. Alliances expanded. Sanctions tightened. Demographics shifted. Questions grew louder. History rarely moves cleanly, but it does reveal patterns. Systems built on fear and control struggle when faced with sustained resistance from people who refuse to surrender agency over their future. That is the larger meaning of this moment. Novo Ogorovo can be repaired. Structures can be restored. But perceptions, once altered, are far harder to rebuild. What was challenged was not a building, but an assumption. The belief that power alone guarantees security. That authority enforced through intimidation is permanent. And this was not the end of the war, but it may be remembered as a point where momentum became visible. Demanded not because of damage done, but because of confidence questioned. History often turns on moments like this. Stay informed, stay aware, and stay with us, because this story is still unfolding.